Well, thank you, St. John's Law School, LUMSA, Mark, grazie mille. It has been a really fascinating conference, and I'm really honored to be a part of it. I also want to thank our stalwart and distinguished audience today on this beautiful Saturday morning in Rome. I'm going to be coming from an empirical perspective to pick up where Pope Francis began our conference experience yesterday. I'm going to address the worldwide, well, as he said, there is a worldwide persecution against Christians that rivals that of the early church in the Roman Empire. I'm going to be particularly looking at the Muslim world, where religious persecution is the most widespread and where it is intensifying. And in fact, it has become something else. We've observed in our Center for Religious Freedom in Washington, a religious cleansing of Christians and religious minorities in some parts of the Muslim world today. And this is a new phenomenon, it is a new trend, and it concerns a very basic right of religious freedom, the right to exist as a religious minority. The problem is, and this occurs in Christian communities in certain areas where they have long coexisted with Muslims, and we are finding they are no longer being tolerated. And the problem lies mostly with extremist militant groups. These are non-state actors, although they are beginning to exercise de facto authority in certain areas. But it can also, this intolerance, extreme levels of intolerance can also occur as a result of extremist influences being mainstreamed within the societies and within the governments. In most places where this is occurring, the targeted Christian communities find that their governments are either unwilling or unable to protect them, and they have little or no recourse to justice. This extremist trend has strong roots in the rivalry for influence between Shiite Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia, which has spread extremely intolerant ideology against the religious other. And the US invasion of Iraq, the Arab Spring, and weak governments in certain countries have given opportunities for these extremists to thrive. Muslims, of course, are suffering from the resulting conflict, violence, poverty, and oppression. But this Islamic extremism is taking a disproportionate and drastic toll on Christian minorities and other small religious communities such as the Mandaeans, the Yazidis, the Baha'is, the Ahmadiyas, and others. These communities are defenseless, they're without tribes, they're without militias, they're without powers that protect them. So today I'm going to be talking about how Christians not only suffer from war and conflict alongside their Muslim neighbors, but they are being targeted and driven out of their homelands for their faith. In Iraq and Syria, for example, the 2,000-year-old Christian communities are facing an immediate existential threat, bearing the cross of an intense wave of religious persecution. They are experiencing a sudden, massive exodus of their members from the region. And Iraqi church leaders say that between 1/2 and 2/3 of Christians have recently fled the country. That's Iraq. And that was before last week's events in Mosul, which was Iraq's Christian center, where every single Christian to a man left within a 24-hour period, going to other parts of Iraq. Last year, Archdeacon Emmanuel Yochana of the Assyrian Church of the East observed, quote, "Behind the daily reporting about bombs, there's an ethno-religious cleansing taking place, and soon Syria can be emptied of its Christians." Last December, before the US Congress, Bishop Angelus of the UK Coptic Orthodox Church said that attacks against Copts by radical elements are not merely targeting individuals, but the, quote, "the Christian and minority presence in its entirety." Last month in Jerusalem, Pope Francis and the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I singled out and prayed for the Christians in these 3 Middle Eastern countries, Iraq, Syria, and Egypt, who they said, as they put it in their joint statement, had suffered most grievously due to the recent events. In fact, the Christian presence in the entire region is now threatened, since Egypt, Iraq, and Syria are the three of the four largest Christian communities in the Middle East today. And Christians are also being driven out from northern Nigeria, Somalia, Sudan, and parts of Pakistan and elsewhere. Last December, Iraq's Catholic Chaldean Patriarch Louis Sacco posed a rhetorical question at a conference here in Rome, sponsored by our own Tom Farr and Georgetown University. And the question that he posed was, when are the Western, we sometimes wonder if they kill us all. We feel forgotten and isolated. We sometimes wonder if they kill us all, what would be the reaction of the Christians in the West? Well, one of the big reasons the Christians in the West have not been saying anything, and the West in general has been failing to say anything, is because of the Western failure to discern the persecution of Christians from its larger context of conflict and war. They fail to recognize that persecution is a phenomenon separate from the war. And in the part of our political leaders, this is partially because of their secular myopia, even maybe hostility to Christianity. Some 300 prominent American Christian leaders were moved to respond to the Patriarch's plea, and in May, they joined together, these are Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant leaders, pledged to call together the communities to pray, educate, and engage in foreign policy on behalf of the targeted Christian communities in Iraq, Syria, and Egypt. And in this pledge of solidarity, as it's called, which I had a role in helping to pull together and draft, there are about 5 broad common patterns of religious violence against Christians in those 3 countries. And these patterns represent practices that, while not applied systematically or in every place, are concentrated enough, pervasive enough to have a devastating impact on the Christian communities, and they are the greater than the sum of their parts. Together, they, used in combination with a certain amount of frequency, they constitute a crime against humanity. And that is religious cleansing. And while from place to place, Islamic extremists are largely uncoordinated, their actions against the Christians fall into these same distinctive practices from place to place. And their appearance of these practices should be recognized as red flags for religious cleansing. And these assaults, I should add, continue despite the rejection by the majority of Muslims and the condemnation of such prominent Muslim voices as Jordan's Prince Ghazi bin Mohammed and Iraq's Grand Ayatollah Sistani. I want to quickly go over the 5 points, the 5 practices, the hallmarks of religious cleansing against Christians in the Islamic context. And I'm going to be giving just a few examples for each, although there are many more. The first is targeted assassinations of Christian leaders. These killings are almost exclusively at the hands of extremists and radicalized mobs, and not by governments today. Though we shall see whether Miriam Ibrahim in Sudan is actually put to death. These trials and condemnations to death of apostasy that occur, and blasphemy as well, in the Muslim world by governments have not resulted in executions by those governments. And so it's important to recognize that these attacks by extremists are not occurring as a result of the war itself. These victims are not war casualties. They are neither combatants nor are they hapless subjects of collateral damage. Some radical groups have declared their intent to eradicate all Christians. In Somalia, for example, the vice chairman of an influential Somali Islamist group declared, quote, all Somali Christians must be killed according to Islamic law. And for a decade, Somalia's extremist al-Shabaab has killed Muslims who violated its dictates, but it kills Christians, converts or not, irrespective of their individual behavior. Again, this is a new phenomenon. One example is a Catholic nun, Sister Leonella, who had lived 40 years, Italian, who had lived 40 years in Somalia, giving medical aid to the poor. She was shot in the back outside her Somalian hospital in 2006, after 40 years there. In Syria, there have been mounting numbers of targeted assassinations of clergy. An example occurred in April when assassins burst into the monastery of Jesuit priest Franz Vanderloot in Homs and shot him twice in the head. He was not caught in the crossfire battle, but was singled out, though the priest was unarmed and had worked for 50 years in Syria and had come to be widely beloved for his humanitarian work. Aleppo's Melkite Greek Catholic Archbishop told Asia News, quote, we're speaking about Aleppo, as soon as they reached the city, Islamist guerrillas, almost all of them from abroad, took over the mosques. Every Friday, an imam launches their messages of hate, calling on the population to kill anyone who does not practice the religion of Prophet Muhammad. The second category of practice, that's a hallmark of religious cleansing in this context, is forcible conversions. And some Islamic extremists present Christians with the ultimatum of converting to Islam or acceptance of second-class citizenship, that is, living under medieval Islamic dictates and sometimes paying protection money. While Muslim governments long ago abandoned this practice, it has resurfaced in some areas where the extremists exert de facto control. In 2006, Sunni extremists in Baghdad's Dora neighborhood issued a fatwa specifically giving this choice of conversion or death to the 2,000 resident Christian families. The neighborhood was emptied of its Christians overnight. One was Donnie George, the former head of the Baghdad Museum, who's credited with saving most of its antiquities from looting in 2003. And he told me that he fled with his family after receiving a letter repeating the threat and containing a bullet. He then later died in exile. And this pattern is being repeated today in Syria. An Orthodox cleric described conditions in towns taken by rebels in the Christian valley outside Homs. Quote, they are ruled by a newly appeared emirs, and those Christians who were not able to flee these places were obligated to pay jizya, that's the protection money, and Christian women must hide their faces like Muslim women. If they don't pay the jizya, they are simply killed. Last February in Raqqa, in northern Syria, the ISIS has created a mini-state there, and they've issued a detailed written dhimmi contract that they forced 20 Christian leaders to sign, and that is now posted on the internet. You can see it, and you can see their blurred signatures. And they, in this contract, the Christians agreed to abide by Caliph Omar's purported 7th century rules for people of the book, including all sorts of restrictions on their public practice of religion, as well as certain humiliations like not praying loud enough for inside their homes for Muslims outside to hear it. They also must pay a specified jizya in golden dinars. And the contract said if these rules are kept, that they have the dhimma or protection of the Prophet and won't be harmed. If they don't, they will be considered combatants and put to the sword. Forcible conversion is ruthlessly being applied in northern Nigeria today by Boko Haram, and I've interviewed several survivors who told me that extremist group will storm a Christian area and systematically go from home to home demanding that every man convert to Islam. On the spot, they kill those who refuse. Adamu Habila was the sole male survivor of such attack in 2012 in Borno State. He told me that Boko Haram extremists shot him in the head and left him for dead when he refused to renounce his Christianity. The next morning, his wife took him to the hospital where he was treated and was x-rayed, which support his story, the x-rays he showed me. And I also interviewed Deborah Peter, a young girl from Borno whose father and brother were shot to death in front of her. Again, when the extremists, they were killed, the extremists demanded their acceptance of Islam. Her father began chanting Jesus. And Boko Haram has killed many whom it perceives as resisting its strict version of Sharia, including Muslims. But Christians cannot be tolerated at all. Boko Haram leader said on the video, "You Christians should know that Jesus is not the Son of God. This religion of Christianity you're practicing is not the religion of God. It's paganism. We're trying to coerce you to embrace Islam because that is what God instructed us to do." And again, this is a theological justification, rightly or wrongly, for their actions, and it is not justified in terms of providing poor delivery of government services, as the state protest against that, as the State Department has said. I'm not going to have time to go into much detail about the others. The third practice is abductions, and part of the abductions, some of the high-profile cases, were the Orthodox bishops in Syria, but there are many thousands of other ordinary Christians in Syria and Iraq who are victimized by this. And then, of course, we saw the high-profile case of the 276 Nigerian girls, 85% of whom were thought to be Christian. And these abduction of women and girls is becoming common practice, not only in Nigeria, but in Egypt, Pakistan, and elsewhere. And the Catholic Vicar General of the Punjab, of a diocese in Punjab, said cases like these occur daily in Punjab. It's very sad that Christians, often girls, are helpless victims. A fourth practice that we're seeing, and this is a new phenomenon, is the targeted attacks on churches. And this pattern first appeared and got world attention. I won't say first appeared, but got world attention in Iraq in 2004 with the coordinated bombings of several Baghdad churches by extremists. Since then, over 70 Iraqi churches have been destroyed by such groups, some of them full of worshipers. The same thing has happened in Nigeria, where Boko Haram has deliberately destroyed over 100 churches and 4 mosques, I might add, in the past 2 years, according to Congressman Chris Smith in the U.S. Congress. These attacks have occurred on Christmas, on Easter, on subsequent Sundays, and they have killed many people. In the last 3 weeks alone, 36 churches were reported destroyed by Boko Haram in Borno. Egypt saw its churches, scores of its churches attacked over a 2-day period in August, when Muslim mobs, scapegoating Copts for the military's overthrow of the Muslim Brotherhood, went on a rampage. And as my colleague in Egypt, analyst Samuel Tadros, has noted, it was the largest single attack on the Coptic Church in 700 years. Pakistan saw its first attack on a church last September. It was an Anglican church by extremists. And then there, of course, there's that was the fourth practice. The fifth is the blasphemy. And my colleague Paul Marsh and I have written a book by Oxford called Silenced about this phenomenon, and how this is actually a practice that is being applied by governments as well as extremist groups in the Muslim world. It is growing, and it is being applied in novel and ever-expanding ways. And this is in somewhat due to, and maybe in large part due to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, who has given this significant impetus in the UN and elsewhere. And these blasphemy laws really empower extremists within society, and they ultimately work to suppress the very voices like Mr. Taha in Sudan, who seek to reconcile the Muslim world with modern pluralism. Christians are disproportionately prosecuted under those laws. And there's a Catholic woman in Pakistan today on death row, Asia Bibi, for blasphemy. So to conclude, targeting Christians for execution, forcible conversion to Islam, abduction, church destruction, blasphemy, punishments, may seem obvious that these patterns of extreme intolerance lead to religious cleansing, yet the West has been very slow to identify this, to distinguish them from their context of conflict, terror, and oppression, and to acknowledge that their combined effect is a crime against humanity. And America generally has overlooked the real possibility that when political stability returns to an affected area, its Christian communities and other non-Muslims will have been largely eradicated. This is a grave human rights violation. It's also threatens Western national security. And as one Chaldean bishop from Iraq lamented, this is the end, means the end of an old experience of living together. There is much the West could be doing to help these people, to address this new issue, and I'm out of time, so I'm going to conclude there. Thank you.